Shavua Tov Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Terumot. We're up to Perek Vav Mishnah Aleph. Today's Mishnah should be Le'nushmat Neria ben Tzvedlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Minuchatam Began Eden Amen. Rabotai, this chapter is going to discuss the topic of a non-Kohen who ate Terumah by mistake. For example, he didn't know what he was eating was Terumah, or he did not know that eating Terumah was forbidden. Or the Mefarshim add, even if he knew that eating terumah was forbidden, but he didn't realize that it was punishable by death at the hands of heaven, mitah b'dei shamayim, he is considered somebody who ate terumah by mistake, since he wasn't aware of the severity of the sin. Regarding such a person, the Torah says in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 22, pasuk 14, V'ish ki yochal kodesh bishkaga, if a man eats something holy by mistake, which we're referring to as terumah, v'yasav chamishito alav, he must add a fifth to it, v'natan lakohen et hakodesh, and he shall give the holy thing to the Kohen. And the Mishnah explains the halachot taught by this pasuk. Ha'ochel terumah shogeg mishalem keren v'chomesh. Someone who eats terumah by mistake must pay the Kohen with produce that is worth the principal, meaning the value of the terumah that he ate, plus chomesh, an extra fifth, which is a quarter of the principal, which is a fifth of the final total. Mefarshim add, for example, if somebody ate 4 zuz worth of terumah, he has to add 1 zuz of produce to the payment, which means that total is 5 zuz of produce, of which the extra zuz is a fifth of the total amount. Whether someone eats terumah, drinks terumah, or applies it to the skin, whether it is terumah that is tahor or terumah that is tameh, mishalem chumsha, he must pay its fifth of the total amount, v'chomesh chumsha, and if he eats the fifth by mistake, he must pay the fifth plus a fifth of that fifth. Let us explain what the Mefarshim explain. When a person sets aside produce as payment to the Kohen, it becomes terumah. This is not only true of the principal, but also of the extra fifth. Therefore, if you ate the extra fifth by mistake, you have to pay its value plus a fifth. For example, if he originally ate 4 zuz worth of terumah and he set aside 5 zuz of produce as payment, and then he ate the extra zuz, he must pay another 1 1/4 zuz to the Kohen, besides the 4 zuz which are already set aside. And the Mefarshim explain the Torah mentions only eating terumah, like it says, someone who eats something holy, by mistake, he has to add a fifth. The Chachamim, however, learned from another pasuk that drinking liquid and applying lotion to the body are also forms of eating, are also forms of consumption for which a non-Kohen has to pay the extra fifth. And the Mefarshim point out the payment of the fifth is imposed only where one uses a terumah in a usual manner. For example, he drinks wine or applies olive oil to the skin. If a person consumes a terumah in a strange way, for example, he drank olive oil, he does not have to pay the fifth, because that's not a form of consumption, but a form of damage. And the Mishnah continues now, Eno mishalem terumah ela chulin mitukanim. He cannot pay with terumah, rather he must pay with ordinary fixed, which is tithed produce. The Mefarshim explain, you cannot use produce that is already terumah to pay the Kohen, because terumah is already considered the property of the Kohen as a group, even before it was given to any specific Kohen, right? Terumah is considered the property of the Kohanim as a group, even before you set it aside for any specific Kohen. Therefore, paying the principal and the fifth with terumah would be like paying somebody a debt with someone else's property. Rather, you have to pay you have to pay with ordinary fixed, which is tithe produce, because Mefarshim explain, when the Torah says in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 22, pasuk 14, V'natan lakohen et hakodesh, he shall give the holy thing to the Kohen, it requires the person to give something that can become a holy thing, which refers to terumah, meaning he has to give the Kohen produce. Why? Because only produce can become terumah. You're not able to give money or any other item of value. You have to give something that can become holy, which is the food, which can become terumah. However, you cannot pay with tevel. It has to be mitukan. You cannot pay with tevel, produce that did not have the maasrot removed, because tevel has terumah and terumat maaseh, which already belong to the kohanim. So you can only give tithed produce, not any other money or any other item of value, and it cannot be tevel. It has to be tithed. Vem nasin terumah, and then that produce that you give the kohen becomes terumah, because the Mefarshim explained v'natan lakohen et hakodesh, when it says he shall give the holy thing to the Kohen, that teaches that the payment, the principal, and the fifth become holy, which means they become terumah. V'atashlumin teruma. And if he ate that produce by mistake, the new payment that he must make to the Kohen also becomes teruma. Im ratza Kohen imchol eno mochel. If the Kohen wants to forgo the payment, forgive the payment, he cannot forgive it. Even if the Kohen waives his right to the payment, you have to pay the Kohen. And Mepharshim explain, when someone who ate teruma by mistake pays the principal and the fifth, the principal serves two purposes. Number one, it compensates the Kohen for his monetary loss, and it also fulfills the Torah's decree that a person who commits the sin by mistake must replace the teruma he ate with other teruma. The Kohen can release the sinner from his obligation of having to compensate him, but he cannot release the person from his obligation to replace the teruma. Therefore, even if the Kohen forgoes the payment, the sinner must still pay it, because the Torah requires him to give the teruma that he ate, to give other teruma to the Kohen. And that is it, Rabotai, of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet now discusses not only Mea Koheni teruma, but also a Kohen's wife can eat teruma even if her father is Israel. So based on this rule that a Kohen's wife can eat teruma, the Mishnah teaches the following halakha. Bat Israel she'achla teruma v'achriach nised laKohen. If the daughter of a Israel ate teruma by mistake and then married a Kohen, im teruma shelo zacha ba Kohen achla, the halakha is like this. If the teruma she ate had not been acquired by Kohen, meaning the teruma had been separated, but it wasn't given yet to a Kohen, mishalemet keren v'chomesh la'atzma. She pays the principal and the fifth to herself, meaning she must set aside produce as payment because she ate the teruma, which was still forbidden to her. But since she's married to a Kohen and therefore has the same status as a Kohen, she can keep that produce for herself. And the Mepharshim explain, if she had not eaten the teruma and it were still in existence after she got married, she would not have to give it to a Kohen, because upon marrying a Kohen, she gained the status of a Kohenet, which entitles her to keep the teruma for herself. It's only logical that the same halakha applies to the produce that serves as payment for the teruma that she ate. Just as she would be allowed to keep the original teruma if it were still in existence, so too she should be allowed to keep the payment for the teruma as well. Now the Mepharshim add that the previous Mishnah taught us that someone who ate teruma by mistake must pay a Kohen, even if the Kohen wants to forgo the payment. Therefore, even though this woman can keep the payment, she still must set aside produce equal to the value of the teruma and the fifth. The produce becomes teruma, which then she uses to pay, so to speak, herself, but she still has to set it aside. However, if she ate teruma that had already been acquired by a Kohen, meaning the teruma had not only been designated, but had also been given to a Kohen, and then she married a Kohen, she pays the principal to the Kohen who was the owner of the teruma since she stole it from him, but she can keep the fifth for herself. The Mishnah says, why is the woman allowed to keep the fifth for herself? Because the sages said, someone who eats teruma by mistake must pay the principal to the owner of the teruma, since he has to compensate him for the loss. But he can pay the fifth to any Kohen that he wants, because the fifth is not part of the compensation for the loss. Rather, it's a fine that can be paid to any member of the Kohanic tribe, of the Kohanim. Therefore, although the woman had to pay the principal to the Kohen whose teruma she ate because she's compensating the theft, she can keep the fifth, and she has the right to give the fifth to any Kohen of her choice, including herself. She's a Kohen, and she has the status of a Kohen since her husband is a Kohen. That is it, Rabotai, today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen.